somewhere right now. A tanker is moving through a body of water no wider than 34 miles. It carries 2 million barrels of crude oil. Its hull sits low in the water. Its destination is a refinery that feeds fuel into a network stretching across continents. And between that tanker and the open sea lies a narrow corridor flanked by Iran on one side and the tip of the Arabian Peninsula on the other. If that corridor shuts down, even for a week, the price of everything you buy begins to climb. Gasoline, groceries, electricity, plane tickets, plastics, pharmaceuticals, fertilizer. Every single one of them tethered, in ways most people never think about, to a thin ribbon of water in the Persian Gulf. This is not a hypothetical. This is the scenario that economists, military strategists, and energy analysts are quietly running numbers on right now. Because the conflict involving Iran has crossed a threshold. It is no longer a contained standoff. It is no longer theoretical. And the global economy, already stretched thin by years of inflation, debt, pandemic recovery, and supply chain fragility, is not built to absorb what could come next. This is the story of how a war in one region of the world could break the economic machinery that holds everything else together. Not because of ideology, not because of alliances, but because of geography, energy, and the terrifying interdependence of a system most people take for granted until it fails. To understand why a war involving Iran carries a different kind of weight, you have to set aside the usual framing. This is not simply another military confrontation in the Middle East. Iran is not a peripheral actor. It is a country of nearly 90 million people, sitting on top of the fourth largest proven oil reserves on Earth and the second largest reserves of natural gas. It borders Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Turkey, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Turkmenistan. Its coastline stretches along the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, giving it direct access to one of the most vital maritime corridors in human history. And its influence extends far beyond its borders, through proxy networks, political alliances, and military positioning that reaches into Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and Iraq. When conflict escalates around a country like this, the tremor doesn't stay local. It radiates outward, because Iran is not just a nation. It is a fulcrum, a geographical, energetic, and strategic fulcrum around which massive systems of global commerce rotate. And when that fulcrum is destabilized, the imbalance touches everything. There is a reason that every major economy on the planet monitors tension in the Persian Gulf with an almost obsessive intensity. It is the same reason that insurance underwriters raise their rates the moment a missile is fired within range of a shipping lane. It is the same reason that oil futures spike before a single barrel has been lost. The reason is exposure. The entire modern world is exposed to what happens in this part of the map, and no amount of diversification or diplomatic language has changed that basic fact. So when people hear about escalation between Iran and its adversaries, the instinct is to see it as a regional issue, a foreign policy problem, something happening far away to other people in a place most viewers will never visit. But the moment you trace the supply lines, the energy flows, the shipping routes, and the financial linkages, the distance collapses. What happens in the Persian Gulf does not stay in the Persian Gulf. It lands on your kitchen table. Now, let's talk about the choke point. The Strait of Hormuz is roughly 21 miles wide at its narrowest navigable point. Tanker traffic moves through designated shipping lanes that are only about 2 miles across in each direction, separated by a buffer zone. Through this slender passage moves roughly 20% of the world's petroleum. On any given day, something in the range of 17 to 20 million barrels of oil flows through the strait. Liquefied natural gas also transits in enormous volumes, particularly bound for Asia. There is no comparable alternative. There is no backup route that can handle even a fraction of this volume. Some oil can be rerouted through pipelines across Saudi Arabia, but those pipelines have limited capacity and their own vulnerabilities. The reality is stark. If the Strait of Hormuz is blocked, mined, contested, or simply deemed too dangerous for commercial traffic, the world does not have a substitute. This is the kind of fact that should make people uncomfortable. The global economy, with all its complexity, all its technological sophistication, all its trillion-dollar financial infrastructure, depends on an uninterrupted flow of hydrocarbons through a waterway you could almost see across on a clear day. And Iran knows this. It has always known this. The strait is not just a geographical feature. It is leverage. In the event of full-scale military confrontation, Iran has both the motive and the capability to disrupt passage through Hormuz. Its arsenal includes anti-ship missiles, naval mines, fast attack boats, drones, and coastal defense systems positioned along hundreds of kilometers of shoreline. It does not need to sink a carrier group. It only needs to create enough danger that commercial vessels refuse to transit. And the moment that happens, the math changes everywhere. Let's walk through what an oil shock actually looks like in practice. The moment supply is genuinely threatened, crude oil prices do not wait for physical confirmation. They react to probability. Futures markets begin repricing based on risk, not on barrels already lost. Traders, hedgers, institutional investors, sovereign funds, they all begin adjusting their positions simultaneously. The price of Brent crude can spike $10, $20, $30 in a matter of days. In a worst-case scenario, it could go higher than anything seen since the 1970s. But product and service in the modern economy. When energy prices rise sharply, the increase doesn't stay at the gas station. It migrates. It enters the cost of manufacturing. It raises the price of fertilizer, which raises the cost of farming, which raises the price of food. Bread, rice, cooking oil, meat, dairy. Every item in the grocery store is, to some degree, a product of energy. Transport energy, production energy, refrigeration energy, packaging energy. Inflation, which many economies have spent years struggling to contain, gets a fresh accelerant. Central banks that had just begun to stabilize prices suddenly face a new shock, one driven not by domestic demand, but by a geopolitical event they cannot control. And this is the cruel irony of energy-driven inflation. Raising interest rates, the standard tool for fighting rising prices, does nothing to solve the underlying problem. You cannot cool a supply shock with monetary tightening. You can only make borrowing more expensive, slowing the economy further while prices stay high. The result is a trap. Stagflation, rising costs, falling growth, and no clean way out. For households, this is not abstract. It is the electricity bill that jumps by 20%. The commute that now costs half again what it did 3 months ago. The price of a flight home for the holidays that has doubled. The grocery run that somehow costs more every week. In developing economies, the pain is sharper. Countries that import most of their energy, and there are dozens, face a balance of payments crisis. Their currencies weaken against the dollar. Their import costs spiral. Their governments face the choice between subsidizing fuel and watching their budgets collapse, or cutting subsidies and watching public anger boil over. This is the kind of chain reaction that does not appear in a single headline. It builds, week after week, cost after cost, until the weight becomes structural. Now turn to the financial markets. Investors do not process war the way strategists do. They do not sit with maps and calculate troop movements. They calculate risk. And risk, in a market context, means uncertainty. Uncertainty is the single most destructive force. In financial markets, not loss itself, but the inability to price the future. When a conflict like this escalates beyond a certain point, market participants begin doing what they always do in the face of unresolvable uncertainty. They pull back. They sell equities, especially in sectors exposed to trade, energy, or geopolitical risk. They move capital into perceived safe havens. U.S. treasuries, gold, the Swiss franc, the Japanese yen. Volatility indexes spike. Credit spreads widen. Emerging market currencies come under pressure as capital flows out towards safety. The speed of this reaction is something most people underestimate. It does not take weeks. In an era of algorithmic trading, instantaneous communication, and globally connected capital markets, the repricing can happen in hours. One credible report of a mine detonation near a tanker in the Gulf can move hundreds of billions of dollars in a single trading session. Stock markets in energy-importing countries take the hardest hit. European indices, already fragile from years of low growth and energy transition costs, are particularly vulnerable. Asian markets, deeply dependent on Gulf energy imports, face the same exposure. Even the U.S., now a major oil producer in its own right, is not immune. Because American companies operate in global supply chains, borrow in global credit markets, and sell to global consumers. When the world economy stumbles, no one gets to stand apart. And then there is the psychological dimension. Consumer confidence, business investment sentiment, hiring plans, all of these are influenced by the narrative of the moment. When that narrative shifts from cautious recovery to global energy crisis triggered by war, behavior changes. People spend less. Companies delay expansion. Banks tighten lending standards. The gears of economic activity begin to slow, not because of what has already happened, but because of what people believe might happen next. This is the shadow economy of fear, and it is every bit as real in its effects as a physical disruption to supply. Now, consider the supply chains. The modern global supply chain is not a chain at all. It is a web, an intricate, layered, and often invisible web of dependencies that stretches from raw material extraction to component manufacturing to assembly to packaging to shipping to distribution to retail. A conflict in the Persian Gulf does not just affect oil. It affects the petrochemical feedstocks that go into plastics, synthetic fibers, adhesives, coatings, and solvents. It affects the sulfur used in fertilizers, the naphtha used in chemical processing, the ethylene that becomes the plastic bottle, the polyester shirt, the insulation in your walls. Disruptions in these feedstocks ripple laterally. A factory in Vietnam that depends on a specific petrochemical input source from a refinery in the Gulf may suddenly face a shortage. That factory makes components for an electronics company in South Korea, which assembles products sold in Europe and North America. One missing input, one broken link, and the delay cascades. We saw versions of this during the pandemic. Container backlogs, semiconductor shortages, shipping bottlenecks. But those were disruptions caused by a virus, slow-moving, somewhat predictable, eventually containable. A war-driven supply shock is different. It is sudden, violent in its onset, and deeply uncertain in its duration. No one can model with confidence how long a conflict in the Gulf lasts or how far it spreads. And without that confidence, the logistics industry, which runs on planning, scheduling, and predictability, begins to seize. Freight rates climb. Delivery times stretch. Inventory buffers, already lean after years of just-in-time optimization, run dry faster than expected. Companies that have been celebrated for their supply chain efficiency suddenly discover that efficiency and resilience are not the same thing. The system was built for speed, not for shock. And that brings us to the widening circle. Because a war involving Iran is not a bilateral event. It exists inside a web of alliances, rivalries, proxy relationships, and strategic entanglements that can pull other actors in faster than diplomacy can hold them back. The United States maintains a massive military presence in the Gulf region. Its Fifth Fleet is headquartered in Bahrain, directly across the water from Iran. American bases dot the region, in Qatar, Kuwait, the UAE, and beyond. Any direct confrontation with Iran inevitably involves American assets, American personnel, and American strategic calculations. And the moment the U.S. is actively engaged in combat operations against Iran, the conflict becomes something larger. It becomes a great power event with implications for every alliance, every trade relationship, and every diplomatic negotiation Washington is involved in around the world. Gulf, a separate choke point, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and yet it is already under stress. Shipping companies have been rerouting vessels around the Cape of Good Hope to avoid Houthi attacks, adding weeks and enormous cost of voyages between Asia and Europe. If the Strait of Hormuz is disrupted at the same time the Red Sea remains contested, two of the world's most critical maritime corridors would be compromised simultaneously. That is not a scenario with a clean precedent. That is uncharted territory for the global economy. Now bring all of these threads together. Energy prices spiking, insurance costs surging, shipping routes under threat from two directions, supply chains fragmenting, inflation reigniting, central banks trapped between raising rates and crashing their own economies, stock markets selling off, consumer confidence cratering, emerging markets bleeding capital, food prices climbing in countries that were already on the edge of crisis. This is not a list of separate problems. It is a single interlocking system under stress. Each element feeds into the others. Higher energy costs make shipping more expensive. More expensive shipping raises prices. Higher prices erode consumer spending. Lower spending reduces corporate revenue. Lower revenue triggers layoffs. Layoffs reduce demand, and demand reduction, in a world already carrying historic levels of sovereign and corporate debt, raises the specter of defaults, credit crunches, and financial contagion. This is the machinery of a potential global economic crisis. Not theoretical, not distant, not someone else's problem. It is the logical consequence of what happens when a critical node in the global system is violently disrupted and no substitute exists to absorb the shock. Some will argue that the world has been here before. The oil shocks of the 1970s, the Gulf War, the invasion of Iraq. Each time, the system absorbed the hit, adjusted, and recovered. And that is true, but the comparison misses something fundamental about the present moment. In the 1970s, global debt levels were a fraction of what they are today. Supply chains were simpler, shorter, more where economic stress often becomes political crisis. The second-order effects of a Gulf War could include unrest, instability, and authoritarian tightening in countries far from the conflict zone. This is the true scope of the risk. It is not measured only in barrels or basis points. It is measured in the stability of governments, the patience of populations, and the resilience of institutions that were already under strain before the first missile was fired. And yet, for all of this, there is something almost dissonant about it as stability. Because when something does go wrong, when the strait is closed, when the tankers stop, when the insurance markets freeze, and the shipping lines reroute, and the price of energy lurches upward by 40 or 50%, the disruption is not proportional. It is exponential. The very efficiency that made the system invisible is what makes the failure so dramatic. This is the architecture of modern economic life. Brilliant in its design, staggering in its output, and quietly, structurally, terrifyingly vulnerable to a single point of failure in a body of water most people could not find on a map. No one can say with certainty what will happen next. Wars are unpredictable by nature. Escalation is not linear. Diplomatic interventions can still succeed. Military actions can be limited. Cooler heads may prevail in rooms we will never see. But the risk is real, and it is present, and it is larger than most public conversations acknowledge. The world economy was not designed to withstand the simultaneous disruption of its most critical energy corridor, its most important shipping lanes, and its most sensitive geopolitical relationships. It was designed to operate in an environment of relative stability, with shocks that are temporary and contained. What a full-scale war involving Iran threatens is something different. Not a shock that passes, but a rupture that lingers. Not a dip in a chart, but a structural break in the assumptions that underpin global commerce. And perhaps the most unsettling part is this. The people most affected, the families watching their bills rise, the workers in industries that depend on stable inputs, the small business owners with margins already razor thin, they will be the last to understand why it's happening. They will feel it before they see it. They will pay for it before anyone explains it. That is the nature of the system we have built. It delivers extraordinary prosperity when it works. And when it fractures, the cost is not borne by the architects. It is borne by everyone else. By the ordinary, the unconnected, the uninformed. By the billions of people whose lives are shaped quietly and completely by forces they were never told to watch. The modern global economy is a marvel. It feeds billions, employs billions, moves goods across oceans in days, and connects markets in milliseconds. But it is held together by assumptions that are easy to forget and dangerous to test. The assumption that shipping lanes will stay open, that energy will keep flowing, that the next crisis will be manageable because the last one was. A war involving Iran does not just challenge those assumptions. It puts them under the kind of pressure they were never designed to bear. And whether or not that war arrives in its fullest form, the fact that the entire global economy can be shaken by events in a 30-mile wide waterway should tell us something important about the world we have built. How powerful it is, how productive it is, and how fragile it remains.